Revelation chapter 13, verse 1, the dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on its horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear, and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. People worshipped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshipped the beast and asked, who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it? The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise its authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them, and it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. Whoever has ears, let him hear. If anyone is to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. This calls for patience and endurance and fullness and faithfulness on the part of God's people. And the beast out of the earth. Then I looked, a second beast coming out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. Because of the signs it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast, it deceived the inhabitants of the earth. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads. So they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That number is 666. And if that isn't one of the most complicated chapters of the Bible, even to read, let alone to try and understand, I really don't know what is. Well, we're introduced here to the members of an unholy trinity. The dragon we know is Satan, and these 2 dreadful beasts who take control of planet Earth. The dragon, a beast from the sea, and a beast from the earth. Now, the beast from the sea displays features of a leopard, a bear, and a lion. And those who know the book of Daniel will know that those beasts are mentioned in Daniel. In chapter 7, you don't need to turn to it, Daniel has a night vision, and God gives him a night vision concerning 4 world empires in the form of 4 beasts which come out of the sea. And Daniel is looking into the future. God is showing him the future, 4 world empires that are going to be eventually wiped out, but God's kingdom will remain forever. And an angel explains this vision to Daniel. Here is the picture. It's a windy night and the sea is rough. It's being churned up by the 4 winds of heaven. when Daniel sees 4 awful beasts. And these beasts represent these 4 empires. Now, we know that these 4 beasts represent 4 kings. The first was like a lion with wings of an eagle, and that represented, of course, Nebuchadnezzar and the king of Babylon. That empire disappeared like all empires do, and then came the second one, which was like a bear and represented the Medo-Persian Empire. A third was like a leopard and represented Greece under Alexander the Great, who had this, I think by the time of his 30s, he had nothing else to conquer, and it's said that he drank himself to death and choked on his drink. So the fourth is the most terrifying, and it's described as this large crushing empire, bronze claws and large iron teeth, devouring its victims. It's a perfect picture of the empire of Rome. And this fourth beast, this one that represents Rome, it's got 10 horns. A smaller horn grows among the 10. And as this little horn emerges from the beast, 3 of the original horns are plucked out by their roots. And this little horn has got the eyes of a human being and a mouth that speaks boastfully and blasphemously. You read about this in Daniel chapter 7. And this boasting, proud little horn continues until God, described as the Ancient of Days, comes to judge when the beast is slain and thrown into a blazing fire. So we got Daniel there being shown world events, and it's very similar to what we've read in Revelation chapter 13. There's a similarity. It's as if this beast from the sea is the culmination of all those things that have gone before, so vile, so awful, so malevolent. But the final Antichrist will in a sense incorporate all those things and be much worse. But let's consider the beast in relation to Rome, because we must always remember, unless we're futurists, which I think frankly is an untenable position, and that is all these things that happen in the future, then those poor old 7 churches wouldn't have had a clue what John was talking about. It would have been no value to them at all. Now, let's just look at Rome, because most of the commentators that you read suggest that the beast from the sea depicts, at least in the short term, the power of Rome. It says, and I saw a beast, John says, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads. Now those 7 heads are seen as the 7 hills of Rome. In fact, Rome was once known as the 7 mountains. And out of this mysterious power of Rome is this dreadful, wicked person who is referred to by a number 666. Now we must remember that Revelation is to some extent written in code. It's written in apocalyptic language to people who understand the code, because to write these things would bring about awful problems for the Christians. So it's written in a kind of code at time to protect the Christian community. Now we know that the Christians suffered under the persecution from Rome more than any other Christians, I would suggest, have ever suffered. And one of the worst periods was under Nero, who began his reign in 54 AD at the age of 17 and committed suicide at the age of 31. Now, you know from history that in 64 AD there was an awful fire in Rome. Some suggest that Nero started it, and the Christians were blamed for it. And for 6 days, the fire raged and consumed 3/4 of the city. And the people blamed Nero, and in order to get the blame off him, he blamed the Christians. Some suggest that Nero just started the fire for his own amusements, but the Christians got the blame. And he ordered the arrest of a few of the Christians who, under torture, accused other Christians. And so they then came under this terrible, terrible period of persecution. So many Christians were found, rounded up and killed in the most awful, awful ways for the amusement of Rome. Many were covered in the hides of animals, and the dogs were set on them and they were eaten alive by dogs. Many were nailed to crosses. Some, as I said last week, were put by way of amusement in a sort of Colosseum where they were tied to a stake, and Nero would come dressed in an animal skin, and they would let him out of the cage, and then he would attack their genitals. This was the kind of wickedness we're talking about. Some of the Christians were used, as you know, for Nero's garden parties. They were planted in the ground and set alight for his barbecues. And he murdered his own mother. He castrated a young man and married him. He kicked his pregnant wife to death. He was as wicked a man, probably, who has ever lived. Now, this 666, this is a cryptogram. This is a code. It's a type of puzzle that consists of a short piece of encrypted text. And often letters were replaced by figures. You get this in the Roman language. You've got Roman numerals. X equals 10, V equals 5, M equals 1,000. Now, in Hebrew, the name of Nero was transliterated as Neron Kaiser. That is Nero Caesar. And this converts into the number 666. And I want to suggest that those who heard it knew perfectly well that was the case. Now, it's interesting because the Bible, as you know, the scriptures, the manuscripts were copied endlessly, very, very carefully, but sometimes there were minor mistakes, nothing serious, because the time that was taken and the people that were employed to do so spent so long on it that there were very few textual variations. But here's one. Some of those manuscripts show a figure of 616, not 666. And here's the explanation: that the Latin transliteration of the name Nero is different, and if you apply the same cryptogram, it translates as 616. Now, we've heard endless speculation about this number. Goodness, I've had people phone me to say they shouldn't have the COVID jam because it could be 666. I don't know where you start with that. My reply is this to people who think that: what kind of a God do you believe in? Do you believe that innocently taking a COVID injection would render you to eternal damnation? What kind of a God are we talking about? And we've had so many ridiculous suggestions as to what this 666 might be. But it's quite clear that number meant something to the early churches. They understood it. So we can argue about that later. But okay, there is a figure in history, Nero, who fits the bill for those 7 churches and is a prototype of the end time Antichrist. And there have been a number of suggestions, as I've said in my notes that I put into a book, who were these prototypes. Antiochus Epiphanes, which we talked about last week, Nero, the Pope. Many people still believe that the Pope is the Antichrist. I don't know whether anyone's read the history of the Roman Catholic Church or has read what's going on at the moment, but it's frightening what is being said, and churches coming together in a sort of ecumenical movement and joining together with the things that are happening. It's basically a gross ignorance of what is really happening. Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, all these wicked people have been seen as the prototype of the final Antichrist. Well, we know this. He will propagate false teaching, and this is why we have to be on our guard. You know, Antichrist will not come, or the false prophet with a sign on their forehead saying, I am Antichrist, I am the false prophet. We need to watch out for what is being spoken. It may be very, very subtle. Someone once said, you know, you can make a beautiful ham sandwich. You can put on your salad, you can put on your ham, you can put on all the things. It's a lovely sandwich, and all you need is just a little bit of arsenic on it. And often false teaching will appear to be perfectly okay, but there's a little bit of arsenic there. And this Antichrist will no doubt, and his henchmen, propagate false religious beliefs. He will deny that Jesus is the Christ. John tells us this. Who is a liar but he who denies that Jesus is the Christ? He is Antichrist, who denies the Father and the Son. He'll deny the incarnation. Again, John says this in his epistle. Dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. This is how you can recognize the Spirit of God. Every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God, but every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard is coming, and even now is already in the world. John says this in the second epistle. I say this because many deceivers who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh have gone out into the world. Any such person is the deceiver and the Antichrist. We know his title is Son of Perdition, the lawless one. His character is the very opposite of the character of Jesus, who humbled himself. Wonderful. You know, Jesus was humble, don't you? He was humble. You know, he said so himself. The character of Antichrist will be so different. He will exalt himself. He will come from the pit, as opposed to Jesus, who came from heaven. And the activity of Satan in the last days is a blasphemous parody of the Trinity and the culmination of his desire to be like, as Isaiah said, to be like the Most High. We shall have this unholy Trinity, which is the very antithesis, the very opposite of who Jesus is. John, I wonder if you put on the screen, I've just put a summary, which I've taken from my notes, a summary of his characteristics. He will rise from the sea, which represents humanity. That is, I believe he will be human. Secondly, he will have 7 heads, 10 horns, and 10 diadems or crowns, which suggest he will bring together an immense international economic and political coalition, all under the direct control of Satan. 3, he receives power from Satan. Unlike Jesus, who refused to bow to Satan, Antichrist will bow to him. He will be his instrument on the earth. Number 4, Antichrist will be so popular to the point of adoration, worshipped by the whole world. 5, he will be blasphemous, speaking evil of God and his people. 6, he will have military supremacy and no one will be able to make war with him. 7, he will persecute and kill Christians. 8, he will suffer an assassination attempt, but will survive as if by a miracle. This appears to be a parody of the resurrection of Jesus. 9, he will rule as supreme ruler of the world for a short period of time. And 10, his end is inevitable. He will be destroyed. Thank you, John, if you could put me back on. And I've nearly finished because I thought it might be useful to talk about how Antichrist might arise in the modern circumstances in which we live. And the first one there's only 2 I want to mention. I want to mention ecumenism and the world order, because in recent years, the importance of world religion is appropriate in relation to world peace, global peace. We've got the rise of Islamic fundamentalism and all the problems that cause, and many are trying to bring peace. It's interesting, I was doing a little bit of reading today. Constantine endeavored to bring about unity in Rome. And he called the Council of Nicaea the first ecumenical council, and Christians only took part in that because they wanted to deal with those who were denying the deity of Jesus Christ. But Constantine was only concerned about political unity. He wanted peace. He wanted the bishops to agree. And he, by his own admission, considered the deity of Christ meaningless. He realized that disagreement between these political forces could bring about the downfall of Rome politically. Listen to Mother Teresa, by the way, who people hold up as such a wonderful Christian. Listen to her words now. If in coming face to face with God, we accept him in our lives, then we become a better Hindu, a better Muslim, a better Catholic, a better whatever we are. What God is in your mind, you must accept. All right? And I just put that in as a quote because everyone holds people up as wonderful Christians, but they did not believe what you and I believe. They did not follow what the Bible teaches. So you've got ecumenism, you've got this desire to bring together the world religions for peace. It's happening all over the world. Throw into that the ecology, global warming, the destruction of the earth. Now, his strange this is, because God is going to destroy the earth. They're fighting a losing battle. Revelation chapter 11, verse 8. You can turn to it, 18, you can turn to it if you like. It's interesting. It says this: the nations were angry, and your wrath has come. The time has come for judging the dead and the rewarding of your servants, the prophets, and your people who revere your name, both great and small, and for destroying those who destroy the earth. God's judgments are actually, if you read them, are ecological. He's going to devastate the grass and the trees and the oceans and the rivers. And this potential threat that man sees now is the means of, or at least they see it as, well, we've got to get together if we're going to have world peace. We've got to deal with this problem. And Prince Philip, incidentally, was a major player in this, a major player. He began something called the World Wildlife Fund, one of the leading environmentalists. And they funded the start of a North American conference on religion and ecology because they wanted to bring religion and ecology together. That's ridiculous to the Christian. They're completely irreconcilable. In fact, in 1990, the conference provided an Easter Day sermon for the pastors, which turned the resurrection of Jesus into a symbol of the earth's ecological agony and the resurrection that our efforts would effect. You see, this is syncretism, this bringing together of what is wonderful with what is profane. In the 90s, they proclaimed a new and powerful alliance between conservation groups and religious organizations. And on the 25th anniversary, the celebrations ended with an interfaith ceremony where the Jewish shofar and Tibetan mountain horns were sounded outside the Basilica of St. Francis, where passages from the New Testament, the Quran, and other religious texts were read aloud. That's what we're talking about. And Prince Philip stood and announced, I'm not getting at Prince Philip, I'm not judging whether he's with God at all. I'm just saying we need to be aware of these things. This is what he said. I believe that today in this famous shrine of the saint of ecology, a new and powerful alliance has been forged between the forces of religion and the forces of conservation. There can be little advantage, he says, in attempting to save souls or in seeking enlightenment or salvation if humanity's very existence is threatened by its own activities. You see, this kind of thing fosters the rejection of the scriptures. I could say we suggest we know the only hope for mankind is Jesus Christ. He is the only hope. So let me finish. When Antichrist comes, the earth will turn into a veritable hell. All hell will break loose as he plays his last cards in his effort in this cosmic struggle with God. And we know from Revelation chapter 12 that Satan will be cast out into the earth and the angels with him. And then those without Christ will begin to discover the horror that they are in. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows he has but a short time. I was looking on Facebook today, and one of my old poems came up from 5 years ago. I'll read it to you. Preaching must be relevant, we are told today. Need to get down with the kids. Be careful what you say. Avoid those words which might offend God's anger over sin, and throw some cliches in the mix. That's sure to bring them in. Fulfill your dreams. Know who you are. Bind and loose and awesome. Throw in some lies and call folks guys. That's sure enough to draw some. Like watching houses burn and people in the mire, telling them they're awesome instead of shouting fire. As I believe that with all my heart. We're living in days when these things will begin to happen. Maybe they already are. And we need to tell the truth in love to make sure we preach the whole counsel of God. Thank you very much for listening patiently.